In the spring of 1945, after 6 years of relentless war, the capital of Nazi Germany stood on the edge of collapse. Berlin, once the proud center of Hitler's empire, was now a shattered city of rubble, burning buildings and broken streets. The Red Army of the Soviet Union had advanced across Eastern Europe, pushing German forces back toward their final stronghold. The end of the war in Europe was approaching. It would be decided in the ruins of Berlin. The Soviet offensive began in April 1945. Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Ivan Konov led to enormous fronts, counting more than 2 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, and the most massive artillery concentration ever assembled in Europe. The goal was simple: surround Berlin, crush German resistance, and force the Third Reich to surrender. The battle opened with a thunderstorm of artillery. For hours, Soviet guns pounded the German lines east of Berlin. The explosions lit up the night sky like flashes of lightning. Buildings collapsed, trenches disappeared, and German communication lines broke under the pressure. Hitler's once formidable army had been reduced to scattered units, many made up of elderly men, wounded veterans, and teenage members of the Hitler Youth. As Soviet troops pushed closer, the defenders retreated into the city itself, street by street, building by building. Berlin transformed into a maze of barricades, snipers, and desperate last stands. Every intersection became a fortress, every room became a battlefield. Civilians ran for shelter as shells shattered windows and entire neighborhoods burned. Inside the Reich Chancellery, Hitler remained in his underground bunker, refusing to leave the capital. His commanders begged him to evacuate, but he insisted on staying. He still believed victory was possible despite the reality collapsing around him. On April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, Soviet artillery shells began falling directly on the city center. It was a symbolic moment. The empire he created was being destroyed on the day meant to honor him. Outside, the Red Army continued its advance. Soviet units smashed through German defenses along the Oder River and circled Berlin within days. Cut off from the rest of Germany, the city was left to fight alone. Street combat reached its peak as Soviet soldiers closed in on key landmarks. The Moltke Bridge, the Anhalter Station, and the Tiergarten became battlegrounds soaked in smoke and fire. German tanks fought their last battles on the city's wide boulevards, outnumbered and outgunned. The ultimate Soviet objective was the Reichstag, Germany's parliamentary building. Though not used by the Nazi regime, it symbolized the heart of the German state, and capturing it would represent total victory. The fighting around the Reichstag was fierce. Snipers filled the surrounding buildings. Machine gun nests covered the approaches. Soviet infantry advanced through smoke and debris, crawling, running, and charging through open fire. Inside the bunker, Hitler's world collapsed further. Reports arrived of failed counterattacks, divisions that no longer existed, and commanders who could no longer reach him. Realizing defeat was inevitable, Hitler married Eva Braun on April 29th. The next day, on April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. His death marked the symbolic end of the Third Reich. But the battle was not yet finished. Soviet troops continued to fight toward the center of Berlin. On the night of April 30th, Soviet soldiers raised the red flag over the Reichstag, a moment immortalized in one of history's most famous photographs. Although pockets of German resistance remained, the outcome was certain. On May 2, 1945, Berlin officially surrendered. Within a week, the entire German government capitulated. Victory in Europe, V-Day, was declared, bringing the conflict on the continent to a close. The world celebrated the end of a war that had claimed tens of millions of lives. The fall of Berlin was more than the collapse of a city. It was the collapse of an ideology built on brutality, genocide, and conquest. It marked the end of Hitler's rule, the end of the European phase of World War II, the beginning of a new era shaped by Allied victory and the emerging tensions of the Cold War. Berlin, once a symbol of Nazi power, became a divided city for decades to come, a reminder of the conflict between East and West. But in 1945, as Soviet soldiers walked among the ruins, one thing was clear: the war in Europe was over. This was the fall of Berlin, the final blow to Nazi Germany, the end of a war that reshaped the world, and the beginning of a new chapter in human history.